Well, hey, all you wiretappers. Good to be back here in studio of Gangland Wire. I have a guest today that is another former cop, just like me, worked for the Fort Worth PD. I'm talking with Tegan Broadwater. Now, Tegan has an unusual background. He was a
Yeah.
professional musician at one time who ended up going deep undercover to infiltrate the Crips. Now, you know that the Crips is a black gang, don't you? I know you guys do. The Crips and the Bloods. If you know anything at all about inner city crime, the Crips and the Bloods are the gangs. Well, here's this white dude goes undercover with the Crips. Now, we're going to find out how he did that. I'm dying to know myself. So, welcome, Tegan.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Now, let's tell us a little bit about yourself. You just told me kind of nomadic growing up. You went to high school in Houston. You ended up in Fort Worth working for the PD, but you also have been a professional musician and you have a podcast today. You've written a book, Life in the
Mhm.
Fishbowl. You have a company called the Tactical Systems Network. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, music was my original passion, and from fourth grade on until my late 20s, that was all I wanted to do. So I went to college for music, went to a prestigious jazz program, and
Mm.
was touring on the road, and got signed by a label at one of the early South by Southwest conferences back in the 90s, and just grew a little weary of the music industry itself. I love music, and I still consider myself a creative for the book and the music and stuff that I still do today. I still love to express myself. I think it also played a great role in leveraging it in cop work. So ultimately, what happened was as I grew tired of the industry and sharing two beds with five dudes at a Days Inn in Oklahoma City on the road, I also had a kid. In '95, I had a kid, and I thought, man, I do not want to be gone. So decided to at the behest of a few cops that used to come see us play when we were in town, they talked me into doing that, which was crazy because I just never imagined anything else. So I cut 8 inches of locks off and retook my driver's license picture so the guys wouldn't criticize me when I applied,
Yeah.
and got into the PD. I applied actually at Houston PD and Fort Worth PD, and whoever was going to take me first. And Fort Worth was quick to the draw. And although I had absolutely no experience in police work or firearms or anything like that, I feel like I really had the type of personality that they needed. I don't know if they realized that or not, but from the jump, I really wanted to work undercover because I felt like, here I am. I've been touring with multicultural bands. I'm the only white guy in this group and that group and whatever. And I'm going to a music school, a bunch of artists and stuff. And so I feel like even in high school, I'd hang out with the jocks, I'd hang out with the smokers, hang out with the whoever, just we're just kind of a pliable personality, just like good people. So I felt like I could really excel at that. And it turns out that I really could. So I got into the police work and ended up being really, really proficient with the firearm because, again, they teach you how to use it. And I had no bad habits to unlearn. So,
Yeah.
I took to
I
all
was
that
just
stuff
thinking
really
that.
well. Yeah.
I
And
had some
so
bad habits
just
to learn.
most of us do somewhere. But I ended up just politicking to try to go to the worst part of town, so to speak,
Yeah.
with the highest crime areas, so that I could gain more experience. I was super ambitious, learned a lot about the neighborhoods, and at one point, was trying to get into a narcotics unit. And as a 6'1" white stiff nerd, a little more difficult to do so. So I started creating my own resume. I politicked some of the captains to try to re-implement some of the old weed and seed programs, and learned how to write search warrants, and procured some old used expired gear from SWAT. And after just a few years, I was spending my shift making covered buys and learning how to do a few undercover buys. And then at the end of every shift, we would earn overtime and go crack doors down in some old dilapidated crack houses, and make some cases that way. And so by the time I applied to narcotics for my fourth time, they couldn't deny me because I had a bunch of informants. I had, several hundred dynamic search warrants under my belt and all that kind of stuff. So ultimately I was accepted there, and what ironically turned out to be a place that I used to work a lot in. There's an area of town where it was a gang ridden part of town where you had the Bloods and the Crips divided by one single street,
Yeah.
but In terms of the turf, there was a 6 square block area with one way in and one way out that was particularly dangerous and particularly problematic.
Mhm.
We always rode down there too deep, and the cops deemed it the Fishbowl because every time you went down there, people were radioing in. Everybody got a warning ahead of time, and it made it really difficult for us to do work down there. Tons of violence. I remember answering calls down there with, bloody females and kids screaming and, having domestic disturbance calls and displacing these kids, and just a real crazy situation. But fortunately for me, having done those warrants for the few years preceding narcotics, when the problems finally arose, where finally they had a killing down there that drew the attention of the city council, they got together with the chief of police and said, "What can we do? We need to pull all stops to get this little segment of town cleaned up." Because there are good people that are down there being held hostage by these jerks that are just shooting each other and making it impossible for anyone to live a normal life. And these people that are innocents are too poor to just up and move. It's not as easy as that. So they started doing all the typical things. Of course, they're not consulting me. I'm just a grunt. And they're doing jump outs with unmarked vans and writing search warrants and pulling over everybody that moves and trying to get people to flip, and obviously to no avail, or else that would have worked prior. So my whole idea, me being the genius I am, I went to an informant and said, "Hey, what do you think of this idea?" I said, "You pose as somebody that I'm trying to fund. I'm going to pose as T. I'm a big time dope dealer from South Texas and just had my source busted by the feds. I'm coming up to North Texas and I'm trying to get my game restarted. But you are the poor crack dude that's trying to do his little hustle. Because if I'm some kind of big timer and I'm trying to infiltrate Crips here via the dope trade, I certainly can't go start down at the corners and start buying $25 crack rocks." I
Yeah.
said, "But I could roll down there with you and tell them that I'm just buying for you." And that's was the premise that we went with. He laughed his ass off at first, obviously, too, because obviously the fitting in, I fit in by fitting out, by standing out, right? I wasn't going to try to fit into that mold, and I even played ignorant along the way by wearing 49ers and Falcons jerseys and stuff down there in the blue Crip territories. And they'd pull me aside and said, "Fool, what are you doing, you fool? What are you wearing this red shirt?" And I was like, what? I don't know.
Yeah.
Give me the evidence. So there was tons of questions, but I feel like I leveraged my own personality way more than most would. And I all the between not having an elaborate story to memorize, and by knowing that I was going to take this on as a long-term deal, it was easy for me to tell people no. So when they start giving me all these 20 questions, "Where do you live? Where are you from? I've never seen you," all of this, I'm like, "Hey, I'm way higher than you in this game. You don't even know who you're talking to. And I'm damn sure not going to tell you where I live. And I'm not going to ask you where you live. You're obviously an amateur, so I'm going to move on. I got to go do my business somewhere else." And then they would think, "Oh, well, no, I kind of want some money." So they would, ultimately would end up talking me into doing deals. And slowly but surely, I would spend time down there on a little PD budget that we had for our team. And so on days where I knew that key players there were not around, I would pull down to the blocks and ask for them, knowing that they're not there on purpose, because I couldn't afford to spend tons of money every day. So I would go down there and ask for somebody that wasn't there, and then end up hanging out and, share 40-ounce magnums or playing video games or whatever, and getting to know these fools on a different level. And it was just as much learning about their way of life and earning street cred without having to buy bricks yet. So, and that was just on that, skimpy PD budget.
Yeah,
So I
that's always a
promised my
problem.
wife.
Now, how did you
Yeah.
how did you like show cash even? Did you borrow some cash from the feds to show cash? I know the PD gets real nervous if you want to just some show money, and you're saying, "Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring this back. This is just for show." But to generate, $10,000-$15,000 in show cash is hard to do.
You're right. And because you put yourself at risk of being jacked. And
And
that's
you'd be
honestly
robbed too,
was
yeah.
yeah. So that was the biggest concern that I had. And what I was actually doing at the time by facilitating other people, eventually they would see me come and go, and they would see me doing these deals for my partner. and said, "Man, no, don't talk to me. Just give it to him." And they would see me pull out the wads of cash and give it to him so he could make these buys. And nobody was getting busted. So they knew I was a somebody, but I was literally taking our monthly budget from our narc crew and
Yeah.
cashing in a couple hundred ones and then
Yeah.
putting a stack of 20s on the top so that
Oh,
when I
yeah,
pulled
one of
out this
those.
massive wad,
Yeah.
so that was my flash. But after about 8 months, I promised my wife it was going to take 3 months and we'd be done. But I was climbing this ladder rapidly, and bad guys introduced me to other bad guys, and it was just turning into a giant operation. I went to my sergeant, who was the only reason I was able to do this deep cover thing and work off the books so often, and just said, "Look, I'm running out of resources because these dudes are going to start calling bullsh on this because I keep telling them I'm this big player, and I go down there and all I'm doing is buying samples or letting guys talk me into trying some of their crack instead of the powder because I always tell them it's like I don't do no crack. I mean I'm looking for bricks of powder because I
Yeah.
move the big stuff. So
Yeah.
I'd buy samples of the favor. I said, but I can only get away with that for so long. So we
Yeah.
decided to purposely go shop the feds and started with DEA, and I presented all this thing. I have this hierarchy. These are the guys. This is where they rank, and this is how they're working together. And and ultimately, they said, "Hey, we love this case. This looks like a great deal for us. We'd love to take it from you, and we'll let you know how it goes." And I was like, "No, I mean, this isn't just my ego talking, but this is by the time I've been doing this 8 months and down there 7 days a week and building this massive case, there's no way I'm handing it off to somebody, even if they are DEA. There's no logical reason to bring in a new undercover when I
Yeah.
already have this kind of momentum going." So then we went to the ATF. They didn't really have the resources or the people. And somebody mentioned that the FBI had a agent assigned to our gang unit that was there for the gang and violent crimes task
Yeah.
force. And she was currently working another case, but sat down with her, and she was a hustler. She's fantastic, perfect fit. She loved the idea. She was going to obviously let me continue the undercover work, and she spent a few months finishing up her other case. So for those few months, the advantage/disadvantage I had was, since I've been working off the books anyway, now my sergeant thought, well, you're working for the FBI. And the FBI thought, well, you still have a sergeant. And I was just saying, hey, could I get the 17K? I need to buy a bird. And by the way, could I get a different car? And then, in 2 days, I've got cash money and a Range Rover. So now I'm balling, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So now I'm showing up and really able to play the part. And after a solid year, this thing I've stayed undercover for almost 2 years. And
Ugh.
after that first year, I started having people coming to me trying to do deals, and I'd gotten to the point where I was telling people I couldn't do deals because in my mind I'm thinking, well, this cat is actually too small for me, or this cat is not actually a Crip because it wasn't a dope case, and that's the whole misnomer about the case that we had in the first place. The whole point was to eradicate the violent gangsters that were in this part of the neighborhood, and it ended up spreading into other parts of the neighborhood and a larger area of town. Obviously, as ultimately what happened is when the U.S. attorney said it's time to wrap this up, you have your top gun guy, my kingpin, so to speak, in Fort Worth was moving $250,000 in product a week.
Wow.
Then it was time to wrap it up. So after that long, I probably would have just kept going because I got so into it and just so bought into the relationship building and the momentum of the case that who knows when I would have stopped, but I would have certainly burned out at some point. But it turned out that we ended up arresting 51 Crips, and 41 went federal and 10 went state, and it was one of the more successful gang cases. They got tons of time too.
Yeah, interesting. Now your kingpin, how did you work up to him? How was he set up? How did he instance? Can you tell us a little bit about their
Yeah,
procedures and how they had that set up?
sure. And the most difficult part was the kingpin was obviously you're smarter, even though if you're in a gang, there's some level of intelligence that must stop at a certain point. But
Yeah.
this cat he had car lots, he had a real estate license, he had storage units and things like this. So he was sophisticated in terms of a street thug because, typically Crips are, violent dudes that will, take what they need in order to achieve what they need to achieve. But he was smart also. So, he's a dangerous cat to deal with. And ultimately, it was really ironic because really what happened is they had what they called a four-tray day. And now a four-tray Crip is a Crip that originated on 43rd Street in Compton, Southern Cal. So, but they carry those five deuce and four tray, they call them. Those sets were heavily populated in Fort Worth, and so they had a four tray day, and they had everybody in the park behind this Fishbowl area all coming together to glorify Cryptum, I guess, and
I'll be darned.
they're
I've never
all
heard of
there
that one.
together. Yeah, I know.
Interesting.
They even got a city permit. That's how smart this cat
Oh
was.
my
Right?
God. Oh my God.
Yeah. So so of course I'm T from South Texas and I go rolling into the barbecue. I'm still standing out like a sore thumb,
Oh my God.
obviously.
Who's the
Uh,
white dude? Hey, who's that white
yeah.
dude?
And so for every person that would question me and say, "What the hell are you doing here?" I had
Yeah.
just as many people saying, "Hey, wait, that's T. Are you kidding me? You
He's
don't know who this
okay.
is?" And they would start introducing me around.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that my kingpin, I almost thought I was going to have to wrap it up early because my kingpin had left for California to lay low because he was feeling heat. I don't know that it was necessarily for me because I hadn't started wrapping up this case or anything,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, he laid low for a couple of months. And when he came back, amidst all this, there was a basketball game that I got caught up in and met up with a few people around this basketball court in an apartment complex right outside the park. It was just, hundreds of people out there. And turns out he was in one of these games and went to smoke a cigarette outside of one of these apartments. And I met one of my informants out there, and I was like, man, I got to go in and see if he's got a little something. It was a stab in the dark, but at this point, the AUSA had said, "Hey, you got to wrap this up." So I'm thinking, I got to get this kingpin somehow. And as goofy as my informants have been over the years, this one statement rang true and ended up being really profound. And he said, "T, you're way too big to be asking him for something small. And the chance that he has anything on him is already low. And, being so presumptuous to walk up and ask for something small since I only had, so much money to spend that the particular day." He said, let me do it. Let's go back to our first little premise. And so we ran it the same way. I just said, I'm hooking this cat up or whatever. I know we haven't seen you for a bit. I know you're back in town, man. We're just trying to get a little something, something, and just kind of made it really casual. If you don't got it, it's all cool. And he's like, "Man, I
Yeah.
got you." And he reached into his pocket and pulled out this little bit for my partner. I spent a few $100 and then wrapped it up. So ultimately we were able to wrap him up in the conspiracy. Also, by the time you debrief all these people, they're all connecting the dots that you haven't connected for yourself.
Yeah.
And, he ended up getting 25 years. We had a 60-year sentence, a life sentence, and then most of the others ranged between 17 and 30 years convicted. So it was really, really traumatic for me, honestly, because I didn't play emotions at all. When you're working undercover, you're highly goal based. I'm trying to accomplish certain things, and I'm always keeping in mind what I'm trying to do. Yeah. If you get emotional, well, you would know. I mean, as well or better than I. You get emotional in any level of cop work, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah.
It needs to be it's all business, and you're doing your job, and that's the way it needs to be. So, but we start wrapping these people up, many of whom I thought, please go away forever. But also many of who I really adored as people, because I thought, man, if this kid weren't a sociopath, all we did was play video games, and he'd talk about the chicks on the west side of town, and we'd share beers and talk about if the Cowboys were going to get their ass kicked or whatever. And I felt like these dudes are just dudes. I mean, it has nothing to do with race. I think most of us would agree that most people don't have anything in common with criminals that make a living selling dope and moving prostitutes and selling and buying guns. I mean, that's just not the type of people that we associate with. but I found profoundly that there was so much more in common with some of these guys. And it was at that point that I really felt like emotionally overwhelmed and drained. I'd been putting in all these extraordinary hours. And so it wiped me out and during that
Yeah.
roundup time.
And a lot of people don't know just actually the act of being out there on the street hanging out with these guys. Man, and that what he's talking about, the Fishbowl and these projects and these apartments he's been in, and at any time something can jump off. It might not have anything to do with you. Something else will jump off, and the bullets start flying. Man, it's always that
Yeah.
edge of danger and fear going on all the time, and you can't
Yeah.
show
And
it. You can't show
yeah.
that.
No, and I think part of it was my natural personality is kind of calm and analytical when it comes to that, which is why, again, I think my creative brain being engaged was part of my advantage. Sometimes I'd get too creative for my own good, but other times, when guys pulled guns on me, which happened more than once,
Yeah,
I would act like, man, why are you're going to do this? You don't even know what you're doing or who you're dealing with yet. Why don't we have the conversation and then we'll figure out if you still want to pull that out, that kind of thing. At the same time, I'm still moving 100 miles an hour in my
yeah.
mind about what I'm going to do. Do I need to drill them a new eye socket or can I talk my way out of this?
Really, it's kind of like the story about the duck you see going across the pond. On the surface, the duck just looks like he's calm and serene, just kind of going across the pond. But underneath the surface, those little feet are going blah 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 blah.
That's exactly right. That's a great analogy. It's exactly right. My brain's going, holy shit.
Okay, do this, do this. Okay, do this. Okay, say that. Okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah, dude, what's up?
Yeah. But you just stay in character and just like this isn't how we do business, man.
Yeah,
If you want to learn from people that have been there before, you need to put that down and hear what I'm going to tell you because I've been at so many levels beyond what you're talking about. I'd be willing to share it if you put that shit down and stop playing around because this is not how we do it. So I would play it calmly, not even yelling at them. They would yell and whatever, but I wasn't intimidated. I think I probably got slightly complacent to a certain
yeah,
point,
I could see that.
but
Yeah, I bet.
yeah, about 12 months in, I can't remember the exact date. I could look it up, but ended up in a little shotgun house with, trying to do a deal with this kid who was, again, he begged me to do the deal. I confirmed he was a Crip. I'm like, okay. And I go to his house and there's a couch, a coffee table with a gun and a scale and some dope, and then a big screen TV and practically nothing else in there. I'm
Yeah,
sure, as
been
a
there.
cop, you would know. There's
Been
probably
there.
a Bible in there somewhere, probably
Yeah,
right or something,
yeah, probably.
but maybe some porn. But otherwise, that's it,
Yeah,
right? So as I'm talking to these cats, I'm hearing an eerily familiar voice, and you got to realize this is about 2006. So we had three main TV channels. We had
mhm,
Fox, ABC, NBC, and or four because CBS. I think Fox was there by that
yeah,
time,
yeah,
and Fox was running cops like a mother. I mean,
yeah. Oh, yeah, they're
if you
back to
hadn't heard
back.
of Fort Worth, yeah, if you hadn't heard of Fort Worth before Cops, you knew who Fort Worth PD was after Cops because those suckers followed us all day for
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
And we used to have these guys that loved to go out with those crews. It was not me. But when they were off, my sergeant would always assign them to me because me and my partner were hustlers and we would go out and find stuff. So I ended
yeah.
up on a couple episodes of Cops. And so as I'm standing there negotiating this deal
Oh,
with my
shit.
back to the TV, I hear a familiar voice. I'm thinking, no way. But yes, it was one of the episodes of Cops with me arresting a kid for a bunch of X that he had in his pants, and
Oh,
I
man.
just filibustering and talking loud and everything.
Yeah.
And you know how it is too. You could be best friends with somebody that you know is a cop that you see on their off duty all the time, and then you see
Yeah,
them in the grocery store in plain clothes, and all of a sudden you don't recognize them. Well,
yeah, right, yeah,
that was the only advantage that I had because
yeah,
this nobody noticed it the entire time.
yeah,
Even when I wrote the book later on, there was no way I could pull a quote from that experience because the only time I truly panicked was then.
yeah,
And then it caused me to really come back to reality. Once I got out of that alive, I thought every other deal I did after that, I thought, man, has somebody else seen this and I'm not
right,
aware that they've seen it?
yeah.
So it really kind of put me back on my toes and made me really regret doing that TV show too, even though I was made to
Really?
do it.
'Cause, there's some people that are really good with faces, and they
Yes.
remember a face. I'm not very
Yeah.
good with faces, I know that, but they're really good with faces and or your voice, you're hearing your voice, they're really good with that.
Mhm.
So I could see
Yeah,
that
and
was,
I was a dork in both cases, undercover and in uniform, but I was more of a dork in uniform, so I think it helped that I had, the next to shaved head and all that kinda stuff, and then had a
yeah,
little bushier hair or whatever, but, in my mind, just the consequences that came to bear were incredible, and so
yeah,
I was just
really.
fortunate to get out of that situation.
What about chasing down the money? Did you have much luck chasing down any money? Did you end up getting any did you have a civil forfeiture unit by then? I don't remember when those started.
Yeah, we did, and we were doing our own forfeitures. We seized cash, but it wasn't anything outrageous, and we got a
Okay.
few $100,000 in cash, but I know that the kingpin had cash somewhere,
Yeah.
and so my goal immediately after was to his girlfriend actually took over the operation, which was already sort of a mistake. I don't know how much he had to do with that. So I started following her around, and within a week, she was executed.
Mm.
So I never did figure out where his money was. He's since gotten out and probably has it.
Yeah,
No, I did
probably.
not find it. We checked a few of his storage units and tried
Yeah.
everything we could to make connections there, and just never could. There's always one step ahead. I don't know if he buried it or what, but he's got plenty of people on the outside, even when he went in, that would have done his bidding to hide that stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm certain it was there, but no, I did never got to seize that,
Never
unfortunately.
got the big cash hoard. The big
Nope.
briefcase full of money that everybody says, "I ain't mine, that ain't mine."
I know, I
"Oh, it must
know.
be
But the
mine."
beautiful is, well, they all got off the street. That was ultimately the idea was let's lower the violent crime by getting active gang members off the street. That was kind of the
Yeah.
original intent anyway. So
Well, interesting. Now, what about you talked about having some brush with Gotti. What's the story with that?
yeah, so the transition time between being a musician and being a cop, while I was in music school, I had this longing to try to get an experience with being on the road, and ended up auditioning for this. It was, I guess, pop music, rock music, and some show music, along with a comedian and all this craziness that I auditioned for. And they were out of Pennsylvania and the Poconos, and out of Jersey. And so obviously I didn't know anything about the mob at the time. I'm just a long-haired drummer who's trying to get experience on the road. So I auditioned for this outfit, make the audition, go up, and they have a spot in the Poconos at the Caesar's Palace Resorts in the Pocono Mountains, which is where all of the Goombas hung out. I mean, that was their spot, and it was kind of accepted. I was just learning the ropes. I literally on day one was going through the cafeteria line at this one of these resorts, and literally looked over at the girl that was serving the whatever it was. I don't remember what it said. I don't even know what I said. It was something innocent enough, but yes, she was pretty. And my boss immediately looks down at me and says, "You can't talk to her. That's, Tony whoever's
Yeah.
daughter." And I'm thinking, I don't know who that is, but
Yeah.
but he's given me an order. I'm just thinking that's strange. So we're what we would do is typically as the band guys, we wouldn't intermingle with a lot of the resort guests and stuff. So we would go off in these little booths and stuff, or go to the nightclubs where they had these big nightclubs, and we would tour between each of the nightclubs and play, do comedy and all that, open for Tony Bennett types and all that.
Yeah.
So we're over eating a sandwich one day, and my boss, whose name was Terry Moretti, and he wanted to be connected. You could just tell. But you got to realize I'm still a musician, no cop experience, no. I'm the most nonviolent hippie kid, whatever. I just want to play music kind of guy, right? I'm on this gig, and he answers the phone in this club area. They bring a phone over. It's an actual landline phone back
Yeah.
then,
Back in
and
the
he
olden
takes this
days.
call. Yeah, and I don't know how much I can quote him because it was filthy mouth stuff. But he's screaming, he's spitting into the phone. He's
Yeah.
screaming, "So you mother, you blah blah blah, you ever talk to me?" Well, we start screaming. And I'm just looking across the table, just flabbergasted, like, what is going on with this guy? I mean, he's nuts. And he's just going off. He slams the phone down and says, "Come on, we're going back to the cabin." I said, "Yes, sir. I've got all my food. I'm just leaving all my food because I'm freaking out."
Yeah.
So I go up there and we jump in his Honda and he drives me up as he's pulling up to my cabin where I stayed. This big Lincoln pulls up behind us and slides sideways in front of us. And my boss reached down in the console and pulls a gun and says, "Run."
Oh, shit.
All these guys
Shit.
start bailing out of this Lincoln in front of me. I'm like, am I in a movie? What is going
Really?
on here? But no sooner did I think, am I in a movie? I also hauled ass to my cabin because I'm
Yeah.
sticking around to find out what's going on. So all these guys are bailing out of this Lincoln. And you could tell this had to be the people that he just cursed out. I don't know. They had some big standoff. And so they had all this, and nothing ended up happening. I didn't even watch the end of it because I went as far away from potential bullet flying
really.
as I could. But the next day, I go to a payphone and I'm calling my roommates and I'm saying, "Man, I've had some experiences here and I'm really kind of concerned that I think
Yeah.
like the mob is everywhere here." And I thought the mob was just in the movies. I said, but I told him about this story and I recounted that and recounted all these orders about all these people's daughters and everybody that works there and can't talk to anybody. And I said, "This is the weirdest experience I've ever had." And the very next day before our show, my boss walked into the dressing room and said, "Don't you ever mention the word mob again. None of this is your business. You know what you've been told and just do what you've been told, and you don't understand what you're getting into." And I'm thinking, I called my friends from a payphone at a
Really?
7-Eleven, and this guy is getting onto me for those types of things. So I was honestly, it's scared the crap out of me at that point. I was like, okay, well, I'm not doing anything I'm not supposed to. I'm not looking for trouble. But I didn't think the mob even existed in the 90s. Like,
Yeah.
this is passe. Well, to a whatever extent. I mean, obviously, Gotti's a rock star, and that's what happened. Within the next couple of months, is my boss heard that Gotti's wife had fell ill, which she had. She was in the hospital, so he went and visited her. Gotti came out to the show that night, and this was another perspective for me. He walks up to me and he literally puts his hands around my neck. This is nothing that would happen to me today, I assure you. But
Yeah.
as a hippie kid, just like trying to learn life,
Yeah.
he puts his hand up and pushes me against the wall. He said, "This is how you were going to greet Mr. Gotti. You don't look up. You only reach out your hand if he reaches out his hand, and don't say a damn thing unless you're spoken to." And I'm thinking, okay. But then I thought, wait, did he say Mr. Gotti? And then I'm freaking out. Like, what? So that night during the show, we go out on the stage and we play. And he, after the third number or whatever, he's telling a few jokes. And he said, "I'd like to introduce a dear friend of mine. And, his wife is ill, but, Mr. John Gotti's in the audience today." And this is an arena, with 4,000 people in it. Every single person stands up, standing ovation, clapping, cheering loudly, and Mr. Gotti stands up from the middle of the crowd and just kind of waves at everybody. I thought, oh my gosh, this dude's a rock star.
Yeah.
He's a rock star here. So then I'm super confused because again, this is like the Pablo Escobar thing. And well, the poor people swear he gives them, free things and helps the community.
Yeah.
And at the same
Robin Hood, Jesse James, same thing.
That's the most confusing experience of my life. And he comes backstage, shakes everybody's hand. Of course, I'm staring at the floor when he walks in, sticking my hand out when I see a hand. So the experience was not that notable because I didn't even hardly speak to the guy. But the fact that he was there and I got that type of impression amidst that kind of environment really woke me up to the fact that, wow, organized crime is no fallacy. These guys are alive and well, and they have the public's support.
Yeah.
And it was an absolute eye-opening experience for me to be able to meet that guy.
Really. Talk about the mafia, and the mafia is organized with a boss, an underboss. Capos are like capo regimes. They have so many guys working under them. Then you got soldiers, maybe got a consigliere. Now, can you compare and contrast that with a Crips street gang? Do they have any kind of organization at all?
They do, but they are not nearly as organized as they should be. I think if they were more organized, we'd all be in a lot of trouble, honestly. They have guys that they'll call themselves OGs. There are not that many OGs.
Yeah.
There was an OG in this case, but he wasn't even really the kingpin. He was a guy that was in his 40s who shouldn't have been playing around anymore, but just got out of prison and ended up kind of back in the game a little bit. But he was an OG because he actually was out with running the parks with Tukey Williams, who started the Crips in LA. And he was displaced here into Texas and was running around with these guys, but wasn't playing a significant role, didn't really play that, but they called him OG. Most of it I found was predicated on the level at which you ran business, whether they're selling guns or running prostitutes or selling dope. So it was almost like that kind of hierarchy. I didn't hear the mention of lieutenants and things like that much,
Yeah.
but I knew exactly who was on different tiers, but it turned out that it coincided directly with, all right, well,
Uh,
if you want to start buying multiple keys, you need
yeah.
to go see this guy. If you want to buy street level, whatever, or get a whore, you go talk to this guy. And so there were still socio levels of people there. And pretty much the guys at the top were recognized as guys at the top. Everybody else was kind of fighting to be known, but they did so in their work. I think a lot of that does align with the way the families, or in terms of, not necessarily in terms of a formal title, but in terms of how you earned your keep. When
Yeah.
that's how you moved up in those families too. You were a real hustler and you started bringing in big business. You earned opportunities to move up. It was the
Yeah.
same thing, it was just less formalized in this case.
Yeah, like in the mob, there'll be a guy who's a little more. He'll be a soldier, even associate, but he'd be a little more of a natural leader. And then he'll guys will
Yeah.
gravitate to him because he has this certain skill or these connections and certain skills that set up jobs that are lucrative for everybody. And then and so it's, what I hear you saying is within these Crips, did they call them sets down there? I remember we used to actually say there
Yes.
were different
Sets.
sets, which be a smaller
Correct.
group within the larger group. And so a
Correct.
certain set will then have a pretty lucrative, have a good connection for dope. And so that, they may be higher in the hierarchy, but these sets are all totally separate from each other.
Right.
It seems like they're not, whereas the mob, they really have a real pyramidal thing, but it doesn't sound like they
Yeah.
really are so pyramidal. That's
They
right.
aren't as
Right.
pyramidal. They are in concept, but they aren't really as in formality. And when you think of sets, you can just think of it as the different families, because
Okay.
you couldn't just volunteer to be a mob family. I mean, the mob
Yeah.
families were the mob families,
Yeah.
but you also
Definitely.
didn't encroach on other people's business. There were rules about encroaching into other territory and things like that. That's exactly how the Crips work. And unfortunately, and probably the same for Mobland. I mean, if any of those guys decided we're going to become one entity, it would have been a huge nightmare for society and law
Yeah.
enforcement and everybody, because
Yeah.
then you would multiply the amount of weight that they pulled, and it's the same thing within gangs. I think the best thing you can do is just lean on the fact that they're not smart enough to all come together as one and remain organized and civil enough to do that for a bigger purpose, which is fortunate for all of us law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, really. You think about the mob. The mafia brought this organization that I described, the boss, the capos, and they brought that from Sicily. That's been going on for several hundred years in Sicily. They brought that here. Now, the Crips, this is a homegrown thing that just started in like the 1960s. As far
Right.
as the more highly organized as gangs. And, we ran into a deal when they first came out here from LA. We started the LA Boys Task Force, and I was part of that with my TAC team.
Mm,
And we started
great.
figuring out that a lot of these taggers, everybody's freaking out about taggers. We got all these different gangs. Well, sometimes we'd learn that, the 31st Street Crips were nothing but three kids running around with spray cans. And, it was,
Yeah.
you had to look at the narcotics angle to figure out who was who. And that it's the same down there, it
Right.
sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because you have wannabes, but it's similar. Like, I compare it now to a lot of the terrorist organizations that we're combating. When it seems like you have a terrorist occurrence, something happens, and then someone like the FBI would say, well, they weren't on our radar. They're not claiming to be a part of a whatever group or
Yeah.
whatever. Some cases, that's more dangerous than being a part of a bigger organization because you can't keep track of rogue actors. So you get 3 kids that are taggers. You're right. Most of the time, they're just artists trying to be,
Yeah.
relational with other people that are lost. They have
Yeah.
people that,
Yeah.
they're in common. They take them into the group, but they're kind of harmless.
Yeah.
But you also get, some of those smaller sets with people with very little to lose, and you get the right sociopathic combination, and then they'll just walk up and murder you like it's nothing because
Yeah.
they don't care if they get caught. And in that case, same with, a Gambino family. They decide you're going to be offed. Even the guys within the family would figure out, well, it's time for me to do my Sonny Black. I need to turn in my stuff and
Yeah.
prepare
Walk up
myself
and
because it's about to happen. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a lot of parallels in that criminal world.
Really interesting. Did you ever watch The Wire? Did you get into watching The Wire?
Man, I started to. I need to go
Man,
back and watch it. I don't know if it still
that gave you
stands up. But
PTSD, man. That puts you right back
I know.
on them streets.
So I was still working. I was still working when that came out, and that's literally the only thing that I hated was I felt like I was just extending my already long workday. But it wasn't.
Yeah,
It wasn't bad.
you would. best
Yeah,
best
and
cock show,
ultimately,
accurate cock show I ever saw.
the one thing about The Wire that I appreciate the most, and is the way I approached my book too, is that I appreciate that as an audience, you're kind of rooting for some of the bad guys and some of the good guys, and you kind of pick
Yeah.
and choose based on some of
Yeah.
the characters you grow an affinity toward. And I felt the same way in my case. Like when I wrote the book, I
Interesting.
thought,
Yeah.
I'm not making enemies out of all these people. Some of these guys are really have endeared themselves to me and are really got it good dudes otherwise. And so when I present it like, man, I know some people are going to read this and kind of hope that guy makes it out because you know what? I hoped that he would make it out. I hoped
Yeah.
that at the end he would go ahead and cooperate and get a downward departure, and I would testify as to his character, and the dude would get a minimum sentence and be out and contributing to a society. And that's the beautiful thing about the way the story was set up and in The Wire too. So that's because that's real life.
Yeah.
It's not everything's not black and white. No pun
No,
intended.
that's for sure. Yeah, really. In this case, for sure. But yeah, things are not all one way or all another way. And that's the thing. When you work close to people on the streets, undercover like you did, you have a lot of informants. And when I was a patrol officer, I would get out of the car and I would go talk to people and talk to them a lot, trying to develop informants. And you find out that you're not like a soldier in a war zone. There's a lot of really good people out there, and there's a lot of kids that are just lost, and they just need a direction, trying to get some kind of direction. And it's emotionally harder when you really get close to people. But I think the better cops are the ones that will get close to people.
I totally agree with you, and I appreciate that you did that because there's not enough of that going on still. I think there's a lot to be said, even if you're not gathering information and you're just trying to gain some kind of rapport and have a relationship with the people in your city and some of the gang parts of town or whatever. I think it's admirable what you did, and I think there's a lot of people back in your day, my day, and on forward that need to take those lessons forward and just try to be humans, man. Come on.
I had guys tell me we had a big sector. Half of it was more in the white neighborhood and nicer businesses, and then half of it was all black. And these guys used to say, "Well, Jenkins, you just go over there in the east side and never come out." Well, it's boring over there where you are, sitting around at 7-Eleven talking to each other.
Yeah,
come on over
that's
here.
true.
It's not so boring.
Being productive here. Yeah, and there's a beautiful thing. There's a beautiful thing to that. I mean, they've talked about segregating, cops to where you can put, black officers in black neighborhoods and Hispanic officers in Hispanic neighborhoods, so that there's that cultural relationship. And I think that also tends to be a problem because I think we just need to acknowledge that we have a lot to learn about other cultures and make a concerted effort to learn about other people. That's really all it takes is a little effort.
Yeah. 'Cause it's interesting. It's interesting as hell, and I tell you, made a friend over there, and I went into a barbershop. I came back off duty, and we went to a
Mhm.
barbershop they always like to go to. You know, in the Black community, the barbershop is the center. And sit
Yeah.
there and play
Oh, yeah.
checkers with guys and sit talk with them, and, you know, you just find all these really fun people that, you know, you just have this stuff with. They worked at different places. Some of them were criminals. A couple of them were all of a sudden, one of them says, "Quit talking to me about that bank robbery." He said, "That's a cop sitting over there." So, you know, they had everything in there, you know, most of them worked at the Ford plant or Chevy plant or, you know, for the post office and things like that. Just really nice people.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And there's other dudes that would be scared to go in one. So again,
Yeah,
until you experience it, you can't judge, you know?
really. All right. Tegan Broadwater, tell us a little more about what you're up to now. Let's sell a
Well,
few
I
things. Let's sell your book, and
yeah,
you got
sure.
companies, and you got a podcast, you got all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I'll whip through it. But after this case became public, and after a while, I was outed as the undercover. People were encouraging me to write a book, and ultimately, during the debriefs of these guys and getting their backgrounds, we discovered there were 104 children left fatherless after rounding
Yeah,
up these 51 people, and it made me really think about whether or not this was solving any of the problem or not.
yeah,
And I acknowledge that, yes, these dudes have to go to prison, but no, it's not solving the problem. This is
yeah.
step one of many steps that have to happen. And so what really inspired me to write the book was when I discovered that. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to write the book. We'll tell the story in a realistic manner, and then we'll donate all the profits of the book to charities that mentor children of incarcerated parents. So, and I'm thousands of dollars in the hole having written this book, but I'm proud to say, we donate all of what would have been in money in my pocket to those organizations, because ultimately, you've got to keep their kids from becoming
Them,
part of
yeah,
that cycle of
yeah,
violence, because everybody knows what a poor fatherless home for a kid is gonna serve him, and the stats are too high that they're just gonna be susceptible to gang life and everything all over again. And you got to do a whole nother Operation Fishbowl in 20 years, and we don't want to have to keep doing that. So I wrote that book and have been promoting the book for some time. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Life in the Fishbowl, and I have a copy right here. If you find that on Amazon, that's the copy.
all right. I'll have
And
guys,
again, it's
I'll have
for a
links
good
to it in
cause.
the show notes too, guys.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I left. I got so burnt out doing this. I mean, I'd never made more money in my police career because the feds were paying all my overtime, and I
That
lived in
overtime, yeah.
overtime doing this thing. But I left and decided to do something with no risk, like leave with no retirement and start a company from the ground up. And
Mm,
so I say that facetiously, of course, but I started a private armed security firm, and we do protection and armed security. Been doing that for 18 years. And after COVID, I got back into the creative biz, started writing music again because I was being courted to do a movie based on the book. And so I told them I was a musician, started getting all the stuff, and I started writing music that was going to be placements in my own movie, which I thought was a
mhm,
cool idea. COVID hits and spoils everybody's plans. But by then I'd kind of started. I had the book out and I was writing music again, and decided to do a podcast, try to get just a little IP. And now the podcast has turned into something of a passion project for me also, because as you certainly well know, we've been doing it a lot longer than I have. It's a fabulous experience to be able to background and learn about all these different people.
yeah,
and
yeah.
and in my case, I try to find commonalities and very unique people with extraordinary stories. And we just try to find that through line that is so common between people. And I feel like it's a constant learning experience. So I'm doing that. I read a column for SoFrep based on, military, police, and music. And so I'm writing every week, and I just I fill my time is what I try to do. So I've got
Sounds like
people
it.
helping me run the company right now that are doing a fantastic job. It's been a rewarding life. I feel very blessed. I'm just trying to aim for things that will help impact positive change ultimately with all the projects that I'm doing.
Okay. Tegan Broadwater. I really appreciate you coming on the show and us. It's been really fun for me, us sharing our little stories and our experiences because they're not
For
dissimilar,
sure.
as for sure.
Well, yeah, I'm very honored. I'm honored that you have me on, and I appreciate your service as well, sir.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Tegan.
Take care. You have a great one. 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 Take care. You have a great one.